Hello, I hope everyone had a nice lunch. And now we're going to start roundtable 3 of the annual conference about trends for the digital economy. And this session will be chaired by Professor Ziliang Deng, who is Professor and Associate Dean at Ramnani Business School. He obtained his PhD from the University of Nottingham, and his research focused on international business strategies under uncertain environments such as digitization and deglobalization. So Professor Deng, the floor is yours and the panel is yours. So thank you everyone for being here again.
Thank you very much for introducing myself, and it's my honor and a privilege to be chairing this very exciting session regarding the future trends of the digital economy. And today we have 4 speakers from 3 universities. And the first one will be Martina Ferencing from European University Institute. Her topic will be the digital trade integration database, composition and findings. Please. Help yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted, because I have a lot of graphs, so it's better if I stand next to the slides to show you a bit what we found. I'm Martina Ferracane. I'm a research fellow at the European University Institute, and I'm the manager of the Digital Trade Integration Project that I will present today. For digital trade, what I mean is trade in ICT goods. So there's a part of traditional type of trade, but also trade in online services, so all the new type of trade which is now becoming much more important than trade in goods. So what I will do is first I want to introduce the Digital Trade Integration Project, tell you what it is about and what are the partners of this project. Then I will show you some findings of our database, which is already online, so you can already access it and use the information. I have also left here some flyers with more information. And I will show you the findings of the database and the Digital Trade Integration Index, which we are now in the process of developing and will be released in a couple of months. And then the next steps of the project. So regarding the DTI project, this is a project that we started around 1 year ago, and it has 3 main outputs and objectives. The first one is to create a network of people working on digital trade. So if any of you works on digital trade and wants to be part of this, please reach out. We have people working in law, political science, economics. We also have computer scientists. We have people in think tanks, international organizations, academia. So we try to be as comprehensive as possible, and also we try to take into account all kind of regional perspectives. So I will show you in a moment the partners that are part of the project. The second objective is to create a database. We started with the objective to have 100 countries covered in this database. As of now, we have 109. We are collecting now 13 more data sets in Africa, and we are about to start also a new collection in Latin America. So we keep expanding our focus thanks to the collaboration of the partners of the project. And the third objective is the DTI index, which is now in beta version. I will show you some results and will be published this year. So regarding the partners, you see here the different partners. We have 4 universities, the EUI, Bocconi, ERTI, and LSE, that are all parts of a new network called Civica. So the project started as an academic project, but then we had the UN, United Nations, joining. We have 3 regional commissions of the UN, the Regional Commission for Latin America, CEPAL, or ECLAC. We have the Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP. We have the Regional Commission for Africa, UNECA. And then we have some think tanks. We have ESIP in Brussels, the DCO in the Middle East, and the TISA network in Australia. So we really try to take into account different regional perspectives, and hopefully FGV will be the next partner to join this network. Why are we doing this, and why this digital trade project is important? First of all, when it comes to digital trade policies, there is still a lot of lack of understanding and transparency on what should be regulations on digital trade and how should we regulate the digital economy. So the first objective of this project is to clarify regulation and check what is out there in terms of regulation for related to digital trade. Then by having data collected for each country with a specific and detailed methodology that makes possible to compare countries between each other. So we have 65 indicators I will show you in a moment, and it's very easy if you have all indicators and data collected for each country to see what is a different regime across different countries. Then collecting this data, we can then conduct quantitative research. We have just started some empirical research for the UN Commission for Africa to advise the regional negotiations in Africa, and we already are finding interesting results on what are the most interesting policies and what policies affect digital trade the most. And by doing empirical research, we can then identify best practices and provide policy advice, which is our ultimate goal with this project. These are the countries that are covered. Different colors highlight different partners that collected the data, but as you can see, we really cover already 109 countries, so a lot of coverage across the globe. And now we're collecting 13 more countries in Africa. And by the end of 2023, we're gonna have all 54 African countries in the database. The database is online, so you can already access it. This is how it looks like. You can select the country, you can select the policy area, the sub-policy area. There are 65 indicators, and then for each entry you have all the information about the policy restriction. These are all the indicators we have. I'm not gonna, and you can also not really read them here, but you can find all the information about each of the indicator and why we consider each of the indicator important for digital trade. In our working paper, we have 12 policy areas, and in each of the policy areas, the different policies covered. And in the working paper, you find all the information about all these areas. To clarify what we include restrictions on digital trade, and we include enabling policies for digital trade. On the restriction side, we include policies which create a discrimination between local companies and foreign companies, discrimination between online versus offline trade, so book versus e-book, to make it simple. And we also include some policies which are considered to be especially trade distortive for digital trade, following like the trade law approach under WTO. And then we also include enabling policies, so we look at all those policies, for example, data protection, consumer protection law, copyright law, which are considered important for digital trade. So the lack of those policies, also the lack of international agreements or the participation in international agreements for digital trade is considered to be a restriction against digital trade. So findings, what did we find? We have information for each country, number of restrictions for each of the country, number of enabling policies, and you find all this online. But just to give you a snapshot and the summary by region, what we find is the Asia and the Pacific is the region in the world with the highest number of restrictions on digital trade. Heavily regulated region, especially led by China, Russia, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, that are all very active in restricting digital trade. On the other hand, we find North America, as expected, and Latin America. So the Latin American region is one of the most open when it comes to number of policies regulating digital trade. Europe is also very active in regulating digital trade, as we know, with our interest in regulating everything. I wanted to show you the results for Latin America, given that we are in Brazil. So Brazil is the fifth economy in terms of number of restrictions on digital trade, so very active. I guess Brazilians know about this. There are a lot of tariffs, for example, on ICT goods. 3D printers, for example, have 100% tariffs applied. Also, a lot of restrictions on import of goods, but also on services. There are some restrictions on platform regulation and access to content online. The most regulated country in Latin America is Cuba, in terms of number of policies. On the other hand, we have Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, that are very open or less regulated. In terms of income, what we see is that lower and middle income economies are those that impose the least number of restrictions, and high income economies are those that regulate the most digital trade. And on the other hand, we have enabling policies, so implementing policies that support digital trade. What we see is that Europe is very active in implementing these enabling policies, so a good regulatory environment to foster digital trade. On the other hand, Africa is the region with the least number of enabling policies implemented on average. Of course, within each region you find a lot of diversity, and for Latin America, we see that Colombia, Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago, these are the countries with the highest number of enabling policies for digital trade. On the other hand, Cuba, Bolivia, Venezuela, Nicaragua are those that implement the least number of regulations. And again, looking at it by income, we see the high income economies are those that regulate, implement more enabling policies, which is also what is expectable. Now on the index, so I was saying that we have a database that is already available online. You can download all the information, and we are now developing an index. To develop an index, what we need to do is creating a detailed methodology. This is the methodology for Pillar 4 on intellectual property right. So what we have is that for each of the indicator, we implement, we clarify, we give a score from 0 to 1, depending on the restrictiveness of the policy. So 0 means there is an open environment, 1 means there is a very restrictive environment. Then for each policy, we give a weight. For each pillar, we give a weight. And we are now testing different aggregation methodology following different types of projects that are already out there. And we plan to publish this in a couple of months. What we have for now is that the weight is based on expert discussions, but we are also preparing a questionnaire. We will send it out to businesses to understand what is for them most important when it comes to trade. And then we're giving scores to each entry, as I was saying, from 0 to 1. And then the index for now is constructed as an unweighted average of the pillars indexes, but we are trying different approaches. For the index, we also have results for now already on what is the digital trade integration environment for the countries. What we find is that Asia Pacific is the region that is more restrictive for digital trade, while on the other hand, Europe is the most open. If you remember before, I showed you that Europe is also very active in implementing restrictions. This is the graph from before. So if you compare, Europe goes from being the second most active in implementing policies, restrictive policies, to being the most open. And the reason is that in Europe we regulate a lot, but these policies are not very restrictive for digital trade. While on the other hand, we see that for Latin America remains the same. In North America goes a bit above, so there is less regulation in North America, but a bit more restrictive on average. And again, for Latin America, the ranking changes a bit. If you just look at the comparison with the number of entries, Brazil now is the third most restrictive country. So not as many restrictions as, for example, in Bolivia, but more restrictive policies for digital trade compared to the countries I showed before. And Cuba and Venezuela remain the most restrictive countries in Latin America. And the last graph on the index, this is also for Latin America. If we look at the 12 pillars that we cover, intermediate liability is the pillar with the highest restrictions in Latin America. So regulation on platforms is the pillar with the highest number of restriction, followed by telecom, which is a very important sector for the digital economy, which is still heavily regulated in Latin America. On the other hand, there's the policies on cross-border transfer of data, policies on online sales are really open in Latin America compared with the other regions of the world. And just one last thing that you could do with this data, and which we are starting to do with a study we have done for the UN in Africa, is to look at regulatory similarities. So to look, if you look at the policies, to see which policies are similar across country pairs, and to see whether the differences in types of policies across countries has an additional effect on trade. What we know is that restrictive policies restrict trade, but what we also know is that different type of policies have an additional negative impact on trade. So we have measured regulatory heterogeneity or regulatory similarity, which is the same, but just the opposite, but the same kind of concept. This is the regulatory similarities of countries across Latin America. So Dominican Republic is the country that has a most similar regulatory environment on average with other countries in the region. And if you put this kind of information into a gravity model, this is a table for Africa. What we see is that, in short, like the results of this model means that more regulatory heterogeneity is associated with less digital trade. So what we have to aim for if you want to support the digital trade is reducing restrictions, but also reducing heterogeneity across countries, which is intuitive, but also confirmed by the data. So what are we gonna do now? We are now improving the working paper, which I presented, I showed you the link before, is already online, and we are adding some summary findings of the database, and we're gonna publish the updated working paper, and then we are gonna also do the questionnaire for the index and release an additional working paper with the index, and the comments and also criticism is appreciated on both papers, so feel free to access and read those papers. We're also expanding the database, as I was saying, and we are conducting empirical research. We already did it for Africa, and now we are starting a project on Latin America to advise CEPAL on negotiations within the region to identify areas that are of most potential for digital trade integration. That's it, thanks. I hope I didn't take too long.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Martina, for your nice presentation, and congratulations to you and your team for finishing such a huge project, which I can see involves a lot of efforts and investment. Congratulations. Any question from the audience or from the other speakers? Can I ask you a question, Martina? Because I have done some research regarding the international trade and also global value chains. You use a term called digital trade, but actually you're measuring the ICT products as well as the intermediate products, right, for the ICT products. So as far as I am concerned, digital trade has kind of many possible interpretations. So ICT products is one of them, and maybe alternative explanation could be the international trade conducted on the digital platforms, like e-commerce, exporting from Brazil to China, China to US, so on and so forth. So have you ever considered an alternative term for this particular digital trade?
In terms of words, yeah, well, when it comes to digital trade, some people call it e-commerce, some people call it digital trade. It depends if you are in a WTO, if you're outside the WTO. For us, we chose digital trade because it's the most clear in terms of, like, it's just trade that happens online and involves also goods. I wouldn't know what could be a better term. For sure, between digital trade and e-commerce, I find digital trade much more clear than e-commerce, because e-commerce is often considered to be like use of platforms for sales of goods, so it's more e-retail. So yeah, for now it's digital trade, but if you have better suggestions on the wording, it could be trade, conduct, it becomes long, right? You can have a better definition, but what we do in our paper is that one of the first sections is defining digital trade so that it is clear what we include, what is part of it, and it's goods and services conducted online. But yeah, if you have better definition for this thing.
So are those products all traded online?
Yeah, we include trade of goods, not only online, also ICT goods. So what is important for the digital economy, also trade of goods online, so e-commerce, but also online services. So it will be anything that can happen, like platform regulation, social media, cloud computing, all sorts of digital services are covered in the database.
I see. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? A question from the gentleman?
Thank you so much. Thank you for your fascinating, fantastic presentation. I'm just wondering, could you please kindly elaborate more on the, for example, correlation or causality between cross-border data transfer restrictions and digital trade, because it's my personal interest. Thank you.
For this, I can refer you to 3 or 4 papers that we wrote on all of this, on looking at the cost of cross-border data flows regulations on digital trade. In all of this paper, what we find is that higher regulation on cross-border data transfers leads to less trade in services. So it's like clear across all types of data using all types of methodologies, gravity model, or other empirical methodologies. We always find the stricter regulations on cross-border data transfers is associated with less trade in services. In particular, what we found in one paper we wrote 2 years ago for the World Bank, what we found is that the Chinese, I call it the Chinese model. So the control model on data, so keeping data locally, requiring to process data locally, is always associated with less trading services. So in the case of China, of course, it's a bit special because China is huge, so this doesn't have a huge impact on the country. But for all other countries in our database, we find that, we do see that stricter regulation leads to less trading services. What is interesting and what seems to appear from this one paper that was released a couple of years ago is that the European model, which we call conditional model, so certain conditions apply to the transfer of data, for example, the consent of the data subject or like other types of conditions, adequacy and similar, this is not necessarily associated with less trading services. So this is especially interesting because we would expect that this creates also a barrier, but it doesn't seem to appear when we look at the data from with an empirical research. And the reason why this is the case, according to our paper, is that conditions on the transfer of data also goes hand in hand with higher protection and more rights for the data, which on the other hand has a positive impact on trading services. So the kind of negative impact on trade that comes from the conditions is kind of compensated by the fact that people trust more the online services because there are more rights applied online. But yeah, I can send you the papers. We can talk.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? I can see a very high similarity between your database and the index of economic freedom. I mean, they are different, quite different, but your database is quite more disaggregated, more focused on the ICT products.
Which one?
Index of economic freedom. It has about 10 dimensions: trade freedom, investment freedom. Particularly, the trade freedom is composed of tariffs and non-tariff measures. But your database is much more disaggregated, much more efforts. You want to say something about the brochure?
Just if you want to know more about the project, you find here the flyer in which there is the link to the database and more information about the project. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you, Martina, for your nice presentation and sharing with us the nice contribution to the field. So if we have further questions regarding the first speaker, we can still have time at the end of the session. But now let's move on to the next speaker. Amiran Paghi from Lewis University. His topic will be FinTech and hedge funds towards ESMA centralized supervision.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So hi everybody, thank you for being here. I would like to thank you also Fundação Getulio Vargas for giving me the opportunity to present my research at these conferences. So as you can read. So as you can see from the slides here, my presentation will be structured into 3 sections. The first part will illustrate how artificial intelligence has impacted the hedge funds' investment strategies and the way they do business. The second section will identify the implications for financial stabilities of hedge funds' increasing reliance on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the third part will consider a possible solution from a supervisory perspective to address the risks that I will describe in the second section of my speech of today. And in particular, I will consider and examine the opportunity of centralizing hedge funds supervisions in the hands of ESMA. Okay. Well, first, so now we have to do I have to give you a brief overview of the use of artificial intelligence by hedge funds. According to a survey that was done in 2018 by Berkeley Hedge, over 56% of the respondents' hedge funds declared of using artificial intelligence, machine learning tools, and big data to inform their investment decisions and apply innovative trading strategies. Why this happens? Because it helps them to optimize their performance and be more competitive with other mutual funds and other traditional financial institutions. And this is crucial because an high return is needed to the managers to justify the high fees that managers usually charge hedge funds investors. So being more competitive, thanks to the use of such innovative technologies, they can charge higher fees than other traditional financial institutions. So a prime example of how technological innovation has changed the way hedge funds operate is the proliferation that we are assisting in the latest years of commercial database. The first example that we have of a directory was launched in the United States in 1990 and contained information about more or less 70 offshore hedge funds. Today, we have 12 major hedge fund databases available in the market, which provide easy access to data on trading activity and other informations regarding their peers, and allow them to develop very complex market strategies based on their peer analysis. Moreover, using machine learning tools, hedge funds can employ automated process to create new revenue streams and also business models. So they can predict market trends and select specific transactions in the financial markets, and they can also make predictions based on real-time informations and analyze historical financial data to predict the cash flow and key financial indicators based on past performance of similar companies. So just to have a brief recap of what I've said so far, on the one hand, we said that the development of these central databases enables hedge funds to collect large amounts of data containing informations about the investment and trading strategies of their competitors. And on the other hand, the increasing use of algorithms enable them to use these big data in an automated decision-making process. But what are the financial stability implications of such growing use of artificial intelligence tools by hedge funds? Well, it is the increasing risk of a financial turmoil, especially due to the herding behaviors of these hedge funds. So to understand this, we need to briefly open a parenthesis on hedge funds herding. Studies that have been done on the systemic risk of hedge funds have demonstrated and shown that these funds rarely reach such a size that can pose a threat to the financial system, but herding behavior, we missed it. Okay, you can see on the other side. Herding behaviors among their managers is quite common, and the collective behaviors of a large number of hedge funds acting in concert and simultaneously is risky because in this case, what we have to consider is not anymore the size and the level of leverage employed by a single hedge fund, but the size and the level of leverage employed by the whole collectivity of hedge funds acting in concert. But why hedge funds herd? Well, first because of the incentive fees that are charged by the manager to the investors, because the incentive fees are based on net profits and encourage fund managers to herd, because by joining the crowd, basically, they can exploit the efforts that have been done by other fund managers, and so don't have to bear significant search costs. This is what the economists usually call the free riding problem. And the second reason is that it mitigates managers' responsibility in case of a bad investment. So that if everyone loses money, they cannot be fired, and so the poor performance of a fund, of the managed funds, will be easier to be excused. So what is artificial intelligence contribution to hedge funds earning? Well, first, commercial databases facilitate hedge funds earning behaviors by providing a much easier access to a wide range of information about the investment strategies of their peers. And this phenomenon takes on an even greater proportions with the use of algorithms to determine investment strategies. As the decision-making process becomes automated, this risk of herding behaviors increases. Why? To understand this, we need to understand why. We have to consider the studies that have been done so far about the collective machine behaviors, and especially I'm referring to studies considering high-frequency trading. So machines that have access to the same data set will tend to make similar decisions. As it has been observed, adaptive and learning algorithms that interact by buying and selling in the same markets tend to develop collective dynamic modes that are prone to large movements. And studies on flash crashes are very rapid and deep and volatile fall in the stock prices occurring within a very short period of time, usually also followed by a quick recovery, and usually caused by high-frequency trading. These studies have shown that machines also have some form of sociality and can be caught in an avalanching maelstrom. So how can we address the risk that I've described so far from a supervisory perspective? Well, we need to overcome the current fragmentations of EU hedge funds supervisions. The Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive that was issued in 2011 imposes significant reporting requirements on hedge funds managers, but the fragmentations of hedge fund supervisions means that national supervisors now only have direct access on the data issued by hedge funds that are registered in their own member state of competence. Centralized databases used by hedge funds algorithms to determine these investment strategies call for financial regulators to also develop centralized system for administering and processing these data collected. These would eliminate the information asymmetries between hedge funds, which have easy access, as I said, to large commercial databases, and regulators which can only refer to the data submitted by hedge funds managers based in their national jurisdictions. So who should administer these hypothesized central database? Well, ESMA, in my view, is the natural candidate because first, it is gradually taking over the role of a sort of European tech authority, after the implementation especially of the ESA's review in December 2019, reforming the European supervisory framework, which provided ESMA with direct supervisory powers over financial benchmarks and especially data service providers. And second, because its central rule, the central rule of ESMA in the implementation of the DLT pilot regime, which is a kind of EU-wide regulatory sandbox. So, in my view, however, ESMA rule should not be limited to the one of administering these hypothesized central databases of data transmitted by hedge funds in compliance with the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directives reporting obligations. In this way, indeed, also national financial supervisor could indeed access a huge amount of data on hedge funds through the central ESMA databases. Many of them will probably not be able to use actually such a large amount of data. And this is because national financial regulators are today struggling to deal with this rise of fintech. First, because innovation is usually faster than the slow pace and slow moving of administrative agencies regulating financial markets. And second, because regulators are often under-resourced compared to the technical expertise and funding of the private sectors. Effective supervisory activity, to conclude, require an agency that is capable of employing algorithms to process these vast amount of data submitted by hedge funds based on the current regulations. And this agency, in my view, can only be ESMA, since, as I illustrated before, it has already acquired competencies in other sectors of digital finance. The agency will then need to employ such algorithms and machine learning tools, which, by accessing the data contained in the central database, could then predict hedge funds' investment strategies, assisting ESMA in its supervisory activity, and in particular allowing it to intervene ex ante before earning mechanisms could lead to instability in the market. ESMA rule as a direct hedge funds supervisor will also represent an important step forward in the creation of the capital market unions, which should lead, in my opinion, hopefully in a not too distant future, to a single supervisory authority for the whole European financial markets. And this is the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Emmeline. So, any question from the audience? I have a question for you. You talk about a very interesting topic regarding the relationships between the AI technologies and the herd behaviors in the financial markets. So that's why you propose that the European agency will be playing a bigger role. But the underlying assumption is different hedge fund managers will get the same solution with even different algorithms. However, in reality, yeah, hedge fund managers will reach the same solutions, the same products, even with different algorithms, right? That's the underlying assumption.
No, the underlying assumption is that as hedge funds manager, it has been demonstrated that have a quite a herding behaviors. These could be increased by the use of artificial intelligence, because there are already studies that demonstrated that not necessarily they will take the same decisions, but algorithm will have an herding behavior too, and this will be emphasized by decision taken by the machines. But the decision might be different at the end, okay?
Yeah. So I'm curious to know that if we adopt different AI algorithms, like we 5 of us, I use my technology, which is different from yours, his, hers. How can we achieve the same behavior?
But as we said before in a presentation, the algorithm will be trained by the hedge fund managers. And usually, as I said, the reason why the managers tend to err is quite similar. So because of the investment fees and because they want to kind of free riding the other managers so that they can charge higher fees and make more profit. So since, as we said before, they will be trained by the hedge fund managers, they could be addressed to a similar solutions, okay? Even if there could be differences among the algorithms, but the collectivity of these algorithms could take similar decisions. And this has also been, we don't have studies on hedge funds exactly, but we have studies on high-frequency trading. Also in high-frequency tradings, of course, there will be different traders that will adopt different algorithms, but this has missions that they tend to have a sort of sociality that causes, for instance, the flash crashes.
Yeah. So I'm just curious to know, maybe when the AI technologies are further developing, maybe in another 3 years, 2 years, the technologies will be smart enough to leverage such a herding behavior to make profit out of that. Say all the other hedge fund managers are moving toward that direction. Me, by adopting a very brand new technologies, I will choose the other one. Then I will make profit out of that.
That's indeed could help.
Yeah.
For sure. And indeed it is, in theory, there is always already some studies that have demonstrated that some hedge funds not adopting algorithms do the same because the manager are sufficiently smart and they developed good trading strategies to act as so-called market contrarians. So why the other managers, not necessarily of hedge funds, but also other financial institutions, are using more or less all the same strategies, they can make profit by acting as market contrarian. And in a sense, I have to say, at the beginning, hedge funds were supposed to be market contrarians, and so that's why, for instance, they said that they didn't contribute. They are not that risky as other financial institutions for a possible financial crashes, because they in theory they should tend to act as market contrarians. So this can alleviate the consequence of a financial crisis. But then there are also studies that say that in the latest years they are increasing using of these herding behaviors.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for your elaborations. Any more questions from the audience? From other speakers? All right. All right. Okay, let's move on to the third speaker, Alessandra Mitosio, also from Luis University. Her topic will be the online public services, which is a very interesting topic as well.
Okay. Thank you for the floor. I'm very honored to be here today, and thank you for this opportunity. The technological progress and the development of telematics have had an incisive influence on the legal sphere, as well as on the economic sphere. And with reference to the administrative apparatus, the entry of telematics and the network have mainly led to our thinking of the relationship between the administration and the citizen users. In order to analyze the digitization process that is affecting the public administration on a day-to-day basis, the Italian perspective was chosen as a case study, while keeping an overview of the European context. Considering the constant commitment that Italy, especially with the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, is making in its attempt to adapt to European standards. An interesting point of observation of the digitization process is represented by online public services. Therefore, After the notion of online public services, three perspectives are investigated. But now, the question is, what are online public services? Good. The online public services are any service of a public administration usable at distance by electronic means. The first step in European law dates back e-Europe project in 1999, which aimed at accelerating the adoption of digital technologies throughout Europe. In this occasion, Council called on the member states to ensure generalized electronic access to all basic public services by 2003, making low-cost, high-speed interconnected networks for internet access accessible in all European countries. In Italy, the e-government project has been developing since the 1990s as part of public administration reform, with the aim of modernizing public administration through greater efficiency, transparency, and administrative simplification. In this time, the importance of implementing online public services emerges strongly. The constant use of technology, now indispensable for the performance of even the simplest of daily life actions, has greatly affected the public service sphere. It has set in motion a so-called profound transformation of the modus operandi of public administration, thus becoming of the latter a new and peculiar mode of operation. In Italy, a definition of online public services came with the 2017 reform of the Digital Administration Code. Here, it is possible to observe, in fact, the idea of an activity does not regard the exercise of authoritative powers, but is directed at providing utility to citizens through the materialized supplies of services. The dematerialization of supplies in the present case results not only in entities that are not embedded in material res, but also in entities that can be used electronically. And so now it is possible to glimpse three perspectives through which to investigate the theme of online public service and also to understand its value. The first perspective is the process of adapting to European standards. In the lens of e-government, in fact, European Union identified about online public services 4 levels of interaction between the public administration and the citizen users. The first level is in the mere unilateral information activity carried out by the administration through the institutional websites. The second level is in the possibility for the user to download from the relevant delegate websites and platforms forms prepared by the provider. The third implies instead the activity of the private party consisting in the submission of applications. And finally, the fourth level is the online delivery and the use of the service, which takes place through computer and telematic tools. What can be observed is that for some public services, the telematic mode is a substitute for the form of physical delivery of the service itself. And for this, therefore, complete digitization is realized. In the first perspective, the European standards have always represented a relevant impulse for the digitization process and the online public services sector. Recently, in 2021, with the Digital Compass 2030, 4 targets have been set to be achieved by 2030: skills, enterprises, infrastructures, business, and public services. With reference to public services, it is envisaged that all major public services will have to be available online, that all citizens will have access to their electronic health records, and that 80% of citizens will have to have an electronic identity. In Italy, the question is, where Italy stands in achieving its goals, and what is the gap with other European countries? Good. Well, in Italy, an important impulse arrives with the recovery plan, whose first mission allocated 21.05% of total resources of the digitization of the public administration. The interesting question, so, is this. And the answer probably is there is a still long way to go. Italy, according to the DESI report, that is the Index of Digitization of the Economy and Society, updated to 2022, with reference to the state of digitization, occupies the 18th position in the ranking compared to the 27 member states. It is at the lower of the ranking, but it should be noted that compared to the last 5 years, it is advancing at fast pace. With respect to the basic skills figure, Italy is trying to close the gap, but to date, more than half of citizens still lack basic digital skills. The use of public digital services is still far from the European average. In fact, only 40% of Italian internet users use them, while the rest of Europe averages 65%. However, the growth rate recorded over the last 2 years, amounting to 10 percentage points from 2020 to 2022, is important and awfully optimistic. Italy has defined its strategy for coming years with the recovery plan, and in particular with the investment 1.4 of the first mission that is focused on digital services and digital citizenship. To improve the digital services to be delivered to citizens, the architectural elements to be promoted are infrastructure, and so, for example, cloud, data interoperability, as well as then an accessory strengthening of the digital identity system, which will eventually converge into a single and simple solution for the citizen users. To pass to the second perspective, the relationship between the administration and citizen users, we can observe that in the active participation of the user in the obtaining the service, and so the development of line public service is also an important opportunity, a strategic resource for a new relationship between the administration and citizen users. In the Italian Digital Administration Code, the citizen's right to access online public services does not exactly coincide with the right to enjoy them. The right of access is the right not to be excluded from the use and benefit of public facilities and from the use of telematic resources, and it is therefore a right of general scope. Instead, the right to enjoy the service provided is linked to the provision of telematic information and the relational instrumentarium available to the user. In addition to often being linked to the presence of certain accessory prerequisites, in fact or in law, on the part of the user. For the realization of usability for everyone, the above-mentioned instrumentarium must be equipped with telematic information tools, by which we mean websites and web portals, and then with relational telematic tools, which are those that enable the relationship between the citizen user and the administration, of which email is the main example. Therefore, the right to access and the right to use contribute, one abstractly and the other concretely, to the definition of online public service as a factor of social and territorial cohesion. Ensuring equality of access requires not only widespread computer literacy, but also easy access to the network. And so, the main challenge is therefore in the attempt to overcome the so-called digital divide, which risks creating new forms of inequalities, of social exclusion, and reinforcing existing ones. The phenomenon of the digital divide describes the gap between those who are interconnected and those who are not interconnected, generating a situation of substantial inequality. Considering this divide, which contrasts with full development of the digitization process of services, the need emerges to protect a genuine right to interconnection, which must be guaranteed through the provision of a universal service. Besides, the new relationship between administration and citizen users is to be found also in the element of active participation of the user in obtaining the service, which redesign the state citizenship and the relationship between the right to access the service and the right to use the service provided, and entails the transition from e-government to open government, in which the citizen is transformed from mere user to a participant. Open government achieves the transition from the availability in a telematic version of services of a purely informative nature to the possibility of realizing a wide range of services in a complete online mode through the realization also of online communities that favors data sharing and new forms of communication. In the participatory model, thus a level of interaction which was absent in the first season is established. Therefore, accessibility, inclusiveness, and participation are the main elements for the creation of a digital welfare state, which can provide an interconnected community with online public services while minimizing the digital divides. The third perspective, okay. Sorry. Doesn't work. Oh, okay. Sorry. The third perspective is indeed the pandemic impact on the development of online public services. This is the last dimension, and the need to continue providing services during the lockdown and then the substantial resources allocated under the Next Generation EU represent a major boost to the process of digitizing public administration. Among the many examples of online public services, it is noted that a large part is represented by bureaucratic services, and so, for example, on the Italian app IO, it is possible to find several services that local authorities and the national bodies provide for citizen users. The digitization of public services affects not only bureaucratic services or services of general economic interest, but also services that are outside the market, such as social services aimed at embodying the welfare state. A relevant example is in the telemedicine or telehealth in the area of National Health Service. It is a mode of delivering healthcare services using innovative technologies in situations where the health professional and the patient, or two professionals, two doctors, are not in the same place. In addition, the school services is another area interested by the introduction of telematic instruments. The distance education in Italy, DAD, was therefore the tool to meet the need to ensure educational continuity, balanced with the need to counter the spread of contagion and safeguard public health. However, some critical issues have marked the revolution in the world of learning. Firstly, school administrations found themselves unprepared to manage the emergency which overwhelmed them. And besides, the kind of supplies of the services has been non-inclusive and most vulnerable, such as, for example, students with disabilities, as well as those with scarce means and resources. This service needs to be balanced with the principle of inclusion and solidarity to avoid the risk of turning aid tools into factors that exclude the most disadvantaged groups. After the first lockdown period, in fact, there was a shift from distance education to integrated digital education in Italy, DID, a modality that alternates phases in present teaching with distance phases to mitigate the negative outcomes that the first model brought to the most fragile individuals. It is thus a complementary teaching modality in which the physical and the digital learning environments are integrated. Finally, among the mission of the recovery plan, the digitization process is called upon to take place not only in the health sector, social infrastructure, and the education and scientific research system, but also in energy infrastructure and transportation, for which the dematerialization of performance is synonymous with sustainability and participation in the development of urban spaces. And in conclusion, reflecting on online public services is therefore an opportunity to understand, on the one hand, the capacity of the state to be the largest collector of and manager of data, and on the other hand, the importance of the digitization process to ensure efficiency and quality of the utilities offered through the provision of services. It was also appreciated with the theme of online public services that the data economy produced both external and internal value for public administration. And so the external values is this spillover in terms of innovation and development, resulting from the fact that the availability of data allows the possibility of developing services without economic barriers to entry. And moreover, the internal value, the distribution of public data creates internal value, which instead translates into savings for public administration. From what has been observed so far, it emerges that digital public services are one of the main frontiers of the digitization process of public administration. They represent the link between the public administration and the citizen users. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing with us the Italian practices in providing digital services, which is amazing. Yeah. Any question from the audience? Any question from the, yes, please, Martina.
Being an Italian, but I think it's something that probably applies to many countries, because we know that it's great and it brings a lot of value, but it's not happening. Like even in Italy, we see something moving. Like while you were talking, I logged in on the app IO that you were mentioning, and in practice it's very counterintuitive. You click and it all explains you what you can do with the app, but not how you can do it. So what do you think is the major barrier that is actually preventing the implementation of all of these things in Italy in this case?
Yes, in fact, the problem is the digital literacy, and so the implementation of digital services are the principal problem is the knowledge of this from the population. And so a lot of young people, for example, don't have any more speed. That is impossible for a society that is digitalization, and so is a very big problem for the moment.
Good. Any more question? Can I ask a question? I'm wondering whether there is a concern from the general public regarding the personal data protection. Are the general public worried about the personal privacy not so protected by the government? Say if the government wants to promote the digital services, e-learning, e-health, they need to collect the personal information, like the facial recognition. Is such a practice allowed or promoted in Italy? How is the attitude of the general public?
The aspect of data protection is an aspect that I don't studied so deeply, and so but is one of the aspects that is balanced with other principles. So, for example, the principle of solidarity and the principle of respect of other rights that the online public service requires.
All right. Thank you. Yes, please.
It's not a question for her. It's an answer to you, because the data protection that I talked before, public institution has to deal with the GDPR anyway. So, for example, if you don't want Appio, you don't download Appio. Or maybe also App Immuni, that was the app to control during the pandemic the diffusion. Also with this app, it's for consent. You can choose freely if you want to download it or not. Then, if you download the app, you have to read an informative document, and you know the data that they collect, for which time, for which purpose, and so the same things that you read on GDPR is applied to both of the parties, private and public. So this is the things that we talked before. Or you are talking about this or other?
I'm worried about the digital divide, as you mentioned. If some people are not happy about the app, they choose not to download the app, and then they will have to go authoritative ways to enjoy the government services. Isn't that kind of a digital divide?
Okay, we are touching other problems that we have a very complicated bureaucratic process for whatever you want to do. And yes, it's another problem. Now our solution is only to try to ensure right to privacy in the app, but like whatever other app is the same problem that collects. So I don't have an answer. I know that is difficult to talk with a lot of people to do the one thing that you are searching to do, for example, in healthcare, or if you want deliver also a package, you have problem. It's all very slow, also with education institution. I don't study during my graduation in LUIS, but in Sapienza, that is public university. The life in there was very difficult to all the things. Also, if you want an exam before that, you can do it. Also, this process was very difficult. I know that it's not an answer to you. We have digitalization, but it's a choice that is to the state, but it has to be also for the citizens that have to trust. Because also, if you use Facebook and Instagram, and you share data in this way, also you can share data in other ways and trust the state that.
Thank you for joining the discussion. Yes, end of the day, the transparent government and stronger trust from the general public on the government will be very important to solve this dilemma. Yeah. So thank you again for sharing with us the best practices from Italy. And okay, now finally the speaker will be. Sorry. Yes, Nikki Tablanche from Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and his topic will be the artificial intelligence coaching. It's a very, very interesting topic. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and good to have an audience here. So now we move from a very interesting discussion. I love interdisciplinary conferences because you learn so much about other people's fields. And I will take you now away from some of the interesting topics here to psychology and specifically coaching, and to see the role that artificial intelligence could play in that. So I'm an electronic and software engineer by training, and I specialize in artificial intelligence, but I became very interested in psychology, basically in the operating system of the human psyche. How does it work? And I did a complete change away from engineering into, I didn't want to go into psychology because that works with pathology, and I was more interested in healthy functioning people and how we can apply principles of psychology to help people become more effective. And that brought me to the world of coaching. But I've always been looking for a way to combine the two worlds, software engineering, artificial intelligence, and applied psychology. And what I will share with you today is research I've done over the last 4 or 5 years to understand how we can apply principles and techniques from artificial intelligence in the world of coaching. But I also realized that not everyone might be familiar with what coaching is. It's quite a confusing term because we think of a coach as someone who coaches a football team or a soccer team, right? But the way coaching is used in organizational and in personal application is basically applying principles of psychology to healthy functioning people, helping them to understand themselves, to set goals, to achieve goals, and also about behavioral change. And this has become quite a phenomenon around the world. It's now a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are large companies all over the world that offer coaching services. Perhaps some of you have been coached as well. So it really is a growing phenomenon. It's also been shown that it's highly effective to help people with self-awareness and with more effective operations, which improves corporate bottom lines. But the problem is that it's very expensive. So the average rate for an executive coach is about €300 in America. Even in Africa, I did a survey, it's about $100 per hour for one session, right? It's very effective, but very expensive. So especially in Africa, how do we scale that? This is the question that I was interested in. How can we democratize something like coaching to make it available to more people? And that's where I set out to play around and create something that could scale through artificial intelligence. So there's just a short definition about what coaching is. As I explained already, it's a human development process. It's structured, and it's for desirable outcome. So coaches get trained in principles of psychology. They partner with an individual, and you walk a journey of a few months to help the person grow and improve. So I was curious, what potential could this phenomenon play in the world of organizational coaching? How can we democratize and scale coaching? We've heard the word artificial intelligence throughout the conference today. I think it's important to, if you don't know this, to distinguish between different types of artificial intelligence. There's artificial narrow intelligence, and then there's general and super intelligence. So at this stage, and I guess this is before ChatGPT, that might change things slightly, but artificial narrow intelligence is a very specific application where AI is very good at one thing, whereas super and general intelligence rivals human intelligence. But this is not yet in existence, although like I'm saying, ChatGPT might start challenging that. So my focus is on creating an artificial narrow intelligent coaching chatbot to see how that could democratize and scale the services of coaching. So in a normal coaching intervention, you have a human coach and you have a human, and they interact with each other through different modalities: email, WhatsApp, phone, Zoom. Coaching these days is a lot online after the pandemic, so you would engage with someone via a Zoom session. So I was asking this question: what if we replace the human with an artificial entity? Can it work? What would it look like? How good can it be? I set out and I conducted 4 research projects to try and answer this question. The first question I asked myself: how should we construct an artificial intelligence coach? What should it look like? What should be the principles around it? And that was the paper that was published. So I basically said, I'm going to look at chatbots. So you all know it's ChatGPT now. This is, like I say, before ChatGPT. But I'm going to use a chatbot and use that to create an artificial intelligence coach. So I looked at what is effective human coaching, what are chatbot best practices, and by combining the two, I proposed a framework for how to create artificial intelligence coaches. That was the first step I did. There are many things to consider when you design an entity that interacts with people. For example, there's something called the uncanny valley effect. So if you look at those 2 images, which one of those make you feel the most uncomfortable? Is it the one on the left or the one on the right? So everyone who says one on the left, put up your hand, makes you feel more uncomfortable. And on the right, most of us would find one on the right. And why is that? It's because it is too close to a human, right? It's the uncanny valley effect, which says that if something has 0 resemblance to a human, like this phone, for example, we have no emotional response. But as soon as I draw a little face here with a smile, you start recognizing human emotions and you feel warmer towards it, until it gets to the point where it looks too close to a human, maybe like a corpse even. And then it becomes eerie, and we dip into the valley, the uncanny valley effect. So these are some of the things we have to consider when we create artificial intelligence coaches. That's the framework. I won't go through the detail, but basically the framework is there to help us build artificial intelligence coaches. It talks about the human elements of trust and empathy, transparency, predictability. I also suggest that we have only one outcome. If you speak to someone, if you go to a therapist or you go to a coach, you could discuss anything, and supposedly with ChatGPT as well now, but my premise is that because we're limited in artificial intelligence at this stage, focus on one thing. And that's why I created a chatbot that does only one thing at this stage, which is goal attainment. And we put it in the context of an organization. So with that framework in mind, I then developed a chatbot coach. I called it Coach Vici, Veni Vidi Vici, Conquering Your Goals. It used goal theory as a model and something called the GROW model, which helps you set a goal, reflect on what you need to do, the options available to you, and then the will to execute it. That's an example, a screenshot of Coach Vici. So, it talks to you, it builds rapport, it makes you feel comfortable, tells you about its limitations, asks you questions about the goal you want to achieve, interrogates you to make sure, not interrogate, it's a coach, it's not a lawyer. Is that what lawyers do, interrogate? So it helps you to set realistic goals, and then it tracks you and asks you, how have you performed? It checks in with you every now and then. So it's a very gentle way and a nudging tool to help you achieve your goals. I'm going to skip that. So then we did a number of research projects. The first one is to ask the question, well, what will encourage people to use such a chatbot on your phone, and what will discourage people to use it? So I used something called the technology adoption model. Any of you in information systems will know it's a very well-known model that says it tries to predict what factors will encourage people to use the bot. So there's performance expectancy, so how easy is it to use, how useful is it, what are others' opinions about me using it, what infrastructure is required, and what are the perceived risks. And we did a study with MTurk, 226, we did structural equation modeling, and we found that the most important three aspects were people were concerned about how useful it is. People were concerned about others' opinions, so the social influence, whether other people use the bot or not will influence why they use it. And then the actual infrastructure, the phone or the application it's launched on. They were not worried about risk, which is a relief in this era of digital stress about data privacy and things like that, and ease of use. We also found that women were more concerned with the performance of the chatbot, so there was a moderator there, and older people more concerned with the effort. So this gives us some insight as to what is important. So when we roll the solution out now to the public, we make sure that we have champions that will be the ones to be the social mouth of, promoter of this tool, and also that we make sure it's based on solid theory so that people know it will perform well, and then the platform is also important. Then we ask the question, is this chatbot any good? Can it help people to achieve their goals? Can it help? How good is it at coaching? So there was a study, a longitudinal randomized control trial we did over 10 months, where we had two groups. We had a group of users that used Coach Vici for 10 months, and they could talk to it as often as possible, as they wanted to, about their goals and help them track their goals. And we had a control group that had just literature to read about goal attainment. And we found this really remarkable result that over 10 months, the experimental group had a 55% increase in goal attainment compared to the control group that had 24%. So we were really pleasantly surprised that a chatbot coach could be that effective in helping people achieve their goals, as you can see. We also, this is just a step back maybe, there was a human study that was done before this, where 100 people received human coaching for 10 months, and there was a control group that had no coaching. And we measured stress, wellness, goal attainment, and resilience. And we found that the people that had the human coach were better in all four of those measures compared to the control group, right? When we did the same experiment a year later with a chatbot, we found that chatbot could not improve people's stress, wellness, and resilience, but it could improve their goal attainment. That was not a surprise because the chatbot was specifically created for goal attainment. Remember artificial narrow intelligence? We're not trying to do everything for everyone, we do something very specific. But then we asked the question, we know the chatbot was good at goal attainment, and we know that human coaches are good. How do they compare? Sorry. And this was then the fourth study where we And if you look at that graph, you will see the top graph is the goal attainment of people that had human coaching. And you can see that it had a superior compared to the control groups. The second graph is the AI chatbot coach, which was almost as good as the human coach throughout. And in fact, right at the end, on the final time point, it caught up with the human coach. The reason being that human coaching is expensive, so there were limited sessions, but with a chatbot, people could keep using the chatbot. And because of consistent use, it caught up with the human coaching at the end.
Can I ask a clarificatory question? Why are the two control groups different in their goal attainment? What do you mean by goal attainment, perhaps, in this?
Oh, okay, maybe. So, yeah, so goal attainment is, we ask people to set a goal, right? And then we check in and we encourage them throughout the process. And the goal attainment is the self-report score on how the complexity of the goal multiplied by the level of achievement from 0 to 100. Self-report, yeah. So what is interesting to note here is that you see there's a dip initially for the two, the chatbot and the human group, right? After the second time point, the goal attainment dips. So they feel less confident about the goal that they will achieve compared to the control group, which has a steady rise. The reason is, if I ask you, think about New Year's resolutions, right? If you say you want to lose weight or eat healthy, it's a very nice thought, but without any encouragement or any challenging as to how realistic it is, you might find that for the first month or two, you think you're still doing well, and then after month 4, you realize that you're not getting anywhere. So because the human coach and the chatbot coach challenges the user or the client to think about their goals very carefully. Is it realistic? Over what time frame can you do it? What else? What have you tried? It actually dips initially, and then eventually it picks up again. So there's a few explanations for this. We postulate that because the algorithm implements goal theory very specifically, unlike a human coach, which sometimes might let you off the hook if you didn't do your homework or you didn't achieve your goal, the chatbot will check in with you consistently, and it will keep at it, and it executes goal theory quite accurately. Also, for the chatbot, if people are encouraged to type in their goal, for example, instead of just verbalizing it, research has shown that it's more effective. And these are some of the reasons we explain why we think the chatbot was actually quite effective. So there's an implication for coaching as a profession and for organizations. So my research has shown that a chatbot that implements goal theory and coaching principles can be as good as a human coach, which means it can democratize and scale coaching. So there's a study underway in South Africa where we give a chatbot coach to unemployed youths. Did you know in South Africa, people under 35, there's a 54% unemployment rate. It's one of the highest in the world probably, so it's terrible. So by giving the chatbot to people, we could potentially help them at a zero or very low cost to set goals and to achieve it and hopefully be more successful. It could also expand the need for human coaching. When people are exposed to a chatbot coach and they realize the power of setting goals, they might want to then reach out to human coaches, and that might expand the market for that. But then typically also, as with all AI, it might replace human coaches that are not very, that do very simplistic models. So it's a call for human coaches to improve the level of their complexity. And of course, there are ethical challenges. I can do a whole lecture on this, but biases we've heard. So the bias that's programmed into the algorithm of the chatbot, we must be careful of. Who's responsible, the autonomy, data storage, a lot of these topics have been covered. So in the topic of AI coaching, I think it's important to also keep that in mind. So this is typically when I speak to a coaching community, AI coaching will not replace human coaches, but it will be able to be of benefit. It's good for coaches, it's good for society, and now with the advent of ChatGPT, it's even more exciting because all of this research was done before that. So the current chatbot is a retrieval-based model that's rule-based, but now the next version that the engineers are working on very hard is to have a generative approach where we can see how we can incorporate ChatGPT, not to give advice, because coaching is not about mentoring or giving advice, but it's to generate questions that's context-aware. So we are very excited. And in fact, based on the results, we've actually created a commercial company that now creates chatbots for organizations to help staff to set goals and to become more performant. So yes, that was my thoughts on psychology, applied psychology, and chatbots. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nikki, for sharing with us your recent studies for the past 4 to 5 years, which is tremendous. And while the ChatGPT makes the students lazier, I think the chatbot has become, made the students more creative, which is very promising.
I hope so. Yeah.
Okay, any question from the audience? Yes, Martina?
I find it super interesting, especially because you consider usually AI to not being able to replace soft skills, which you should consider to be the job of coaches mostly, right? So it's interesting that you focus on goals, because I think on the other three things you mentioned, stress, anxiety, it would be much harder to try to have a digital coach, but you can say more about this.
Well, yes. So at the moment, I have 3 PhD students investigating different aspects of this. So there's something in psychology called cognitive behavioral theory, CBT. So one of the students is using CBT to try and investigate whether resilience at the executive level can be improved. And we are quite confident that we don't have the results yet, but we're definitely moving away from goal attainment into cognitive behavioral change as well. So I'm hopeful.
Perhaps I just wonder about, you talk about ethical challenges. For me, coaches, the difference between AI and people is that humans also understand better what they have in front of them and what are the different kind of techniques that can help the person to fulfill him or herself, rather than achieve a goal, which is more perhaps something that only some type of people want to necessarily aim for. Some others might, instead of seeing achieving a goal as a good thing, might consider also life-work balance more important, and then for the coach would understand it and then guide them in that direction, perhaps. So yeah, I just wonder, what do you think about potential negative impact on some people that are just that have different priorities? Because this is just standard. This applies. I guess is the same kind of approach on any type of person.
Yeah, like even with human coaching, I'm an executive coach myself, so I've coached a number of people, and some people come to coaching, they're ready for it, they're open for it. Other people don't want to change. So it really depends on the person's readiness and openness to change. But for sure, it shouldn't be forced on people at all. But one thing I didn't mention is that we see the biggest, the research was very puristic in trying to see if you can replace, to what extent you can replace a human with a chatbot. The novelty, I think the potential lies in the hybrid, the combination of the two. So in human coaching, there's the human coach, which is expensive, and you maybe only get 6 to 8 sessions, but you could use the chatbot in between the human coaching sessions. So if I coach you and I only see you in 3 weeks from now, you can use the chatbot in the meantime to reflect on what we've discussed in the session. And I think that way the human stays in the loop, and it's a more humane approach, I guess, to the whole process. But very exciting space.
Good. Yes, please.
The question is very simple. Have you ever tried to apply chatbot to legal services, for example?
To legal services?
Yes, like if you have a doubt, a question about your rights. An example, I have a car accident. What I have to do in this way?
Yeah, and when I see legal, I normally run away, but
I'm happy of that.
I haven't done it personally, but it definitely is possible. And in fact, ChatGPT has just completely changed the landscape in terms of all of that. But and I think in a legal way, I'm not a legal person, it would be almost easier to have a chatbot because it's more rule-based, right? It's not something like psychology. Well, I'm talking out of my depth here, but I imagine that it could be quite possible. I'm in trouble.
No, yes. Yes, we have different services. If you want litigation, you need a lawyer, obviously. If you want legal advice, you don't need. And GTP, I tried, and it's only maybe a lot of information that you find in internet, but in a normal speech, in a regular speech, well designed, but yes, I think that it's easy to do a chatbot for legal advice. Maybe complicated, but
I think the advantage of a chatbot is that it's conversational. So instead of just giving information, if you can have a question and answer and even build a bit of empathy into the process, our research has shown that people warm to it more, and it's easier to convey the information. So I'm sure in a legal route there could be space for that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. All right. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you. It's not so much a question, more a sort of comment. You talked about people being ready for coaching, and looking at it certainly from a physical sporting perspective. People who do well with coaching, they have to be motivated, and if they haven't got that motivation, the coach is on a really sort of steep climb to get anywhere. And I'm sure that's true whether you're talking about a physical development or a career development. You've got to have that motivation. The subject has got to want to do it. And it's how you harness that and maintain that. And quite how well a human or a chatbot does that, I'm not sure. And when you're thinking about a physical development and you're self-reporting, you can do that on a chatbot and you can lie. If you've got a physical trainer, they know whether you've done the work in between seeing them or not. So I think, depending on what and that would be true for work targets, who assesses whether you've achieved that goal, you or someone else, and how honest is the subject about how much they want to do it and how well they really, really have achieved the target that they set.
Yeah, those are very good remarks. So in terms of the measurement, self-report is obviously not the ideal measurement. So we are looking at different ways of getting objective data as well. For example, the time spent on the bot, and then other performance metrics in the organization. So those are some of the things we are also looking at. But the interesting point about readiness for coaching, because human coaching is expensive, the way we've also used this is to see which people engage with a bot more frequently and actively, and then those people potentially are candidates for human coaching because we see that they're ready for it. They're committed. So that, exactly, yeah. So that's a way then to maximize your investment in people by giving them the bot first and see how that works.
Do the bot first, and if they stick with it, then it's worth going to the human trainer, coach, and that's the kind of first step.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. We can have one more and final question from the audience, from the speakers. All right. All right. Because of the time limit, now we are reaching the 90 minutes, the end of the session. Today we have 4 topics covering very broad topics, ranging from economics, finance, law, and also psychology and education. So it's quite a good learning process for myself. So thank you all for sharing with us your thoughts and your project members' contributions to these particular areas. And today's talk also signals the value of our network, the social sciences. Even for social sciences, we can discuss a lot of topics regarding the most advanced technologies, AI technologies, the machine learning, so on and so forth. So finally, let me thank you again for contributions. Thank you. We are finished. Thank you. because this session started around 45 minutes later than the originally scheduled. So we finished a little bit later than the original schedule as well. Yeah.
Well, we have 10 minutes for coffee and stretching the legs and coming back for the flash presentations panel.